was so depressing.
I need taunt.
No, don't tell him.
No,
No, don't tell him. Don't tell him.
He just dapped. That's what he did.
He probably plays Fortnite.
No.
He looks like a teenage kid who's like, no.
Yeah, you almost ran into it.
For so long.
What's funny is those like all the time shoot people off the map. They're so great. My little green power balls.
Oh, stop it! I don't want your green fireball.
But do you guys?
My foot fungus. I have a come on
No,
my
you're
head.
not. Yeah, I got him.
Dude, I was waiting for you to get me because I didn't want to launch myself. Oh my gosh! Get the spammer! Get the spammer!
Boy or the magic?
Oh!
Dude, you could have killed him with that, dude. You actually could have done it. And then you went down.
Oh, I just shot my swing the bullets.
I have a shield pack.
Dang it! Headshot. I don't know head works.
No!
Yes!
I was being shot into it!
Powerball.
The Powerball. You won. No more life. I wouldn't be so sure about that.
I'm pretty sure that you died.
Got him!
You said something similar.
No, he didn't.
I think he said that. I don't want to do that.
You do
You
want to
are
be
that guy.
Yeah.
We're not almost that guy.
Yeah, she was.
I like how I hit Link with that, but
I
I
know.
did no damage.
Maybe it's my shield.
But then I hit Ethan with it, he dies.
It might actually be my shield. It might count for some
Why?
reason as projectile.
Wait, no, let's try it on you. If it kills you, I'll let you kill me. Oh, yeah, you're right. I think your shield does.
No, I took damage.
I know, but I think your shield does something. Because I mean, I shot Nathan out of the map. And only had like 60%.
That might be it.
Why can't I?
So it is like my only.
Are you immune to attack when you're down?
I think so. That's the whole thing. Here, try to attack me.
No, you have to stay still.
No, I'm
Yeah,
pretty
you split a piece of chocolate.
I can't jump on it.
It's literally
yeah.
literally no matter what.
The upbeat didn't work.
Lucky or lucky.
Oh,
Maybe any beat.
why?
Maybe
Yeah.
any
Act like
beat.
it's
Yeah,
safe.
maybe it's just more special.
Got him.
Worse than a pop.
Worse than you. I don't know.
I'm kind of just saying stuff at this point.
Okay.
At this point, you're acting like you have never done that before.
Of course, I always say things I do. Especially to go into hell.
I'm too short. Can't touch it.
No, I still hate you. I won't have you.
You know that comes in real life.
See, look, it
He's
didn't do the upbeat again.
Oh,
No.
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 Yeah, no.
Why did
Yeah,
it go
boy.
just to cancel itself?
Yeah.
Maybe it just took a second to cancel. You're saying it has to be faster than it is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you didn't.
Hey,
Dude, why
right.
do you see you snipe stuff
I
that
wanna
you
take
don't?
Oh, I survived.
They try to make fun of my phone for
Like, no, you
exploiting a
didn't.
RAM. Guess what? I have 2 gigs of virtual.
Oh, like you got it. Like,
Not a place. I still need to figure out how to root my phone though.
Moving it?
Yeah.
Why don't you just look it up?
Because I didn't know you could do that. I'm gonna look into
Oh, I just beat your bullet in
Thank
the
you
race.
for that wise comment.
Oh, yes, you have to go to that. You have to
No,
go
I
to
don't want viruses. I have a great antivirus.
I have a
No,
great
stop me. I
See you in hell,
swear.
Nathan.
You're very good job.
kill both of you.
No.
What the?
Well, stop with Bin Laden, dude.
Yeet.
Seriously.
I fight.
What
No.
is it with you and Osama?
Ah, you what?
Stop it!
It's okay.
I saw that up B coming, Bryce.
I saw it coming too. You can believe it.
No,
Why?
stop.
How does Mac avoid that every time?
I'm better than you.
That's okay. Congrats.
Mm.
You just earned a trophy. You are better than Jaden.
You know, I think everyone has that trophy.
I know. That's why I'm fucking thinking.
Well, we all know who does have that trophy.
Jaden, Shauna Mumani.
What?
No, I think even they're better than you.
I mean, at this point.
Oh my gosh! I almost had. No, don't hit me. Don't hit. Oh, I knew you were gonna do it. I didn't even know why I said don't do it. No. Got him. Got him. No. Okay, Jaden. Jaden, you died.
Get your dirty hands out of here. Because I'm white. You know, I watched a movie yesterday called The Hate You Give. I learned things.
Wow.
You're the cop.
What?
God.
Give him the controller.
You're acting like a white person.
Yeah, that's too far.
You were just joking about how you love and saw your mom.
That's just a fact.
Yeah, Jaden. You went too far this time.
This stuff.
Not next time. Next time I'll go way too far.
Next time I am too far.
Got him. Bryce, get this noob.
Dang it!
Why did you not get this?
Because I actually thought he was just gonna keep spamming. Not knowing I had to shoot him. He's not really a dude though.
He is though. He's a spammer. That's right.
I told my mom when I walked across
You know what
the
he is? He's a
They're gonna
gorilla
say
attacker.
a couple months ago, and then my mom
Do
said,
you know
"Oh
what a
no,
gorilla
I'm
attacker
scared." And I'm like, "What do you think I wrote?"
Nate, do you know what a gorilla attacker is? That's when you attack and then run back to your little safe spot.
A gorilla attacker does this.
Dude, every time he swipes through that wall, Nate mentally gets disturbed.
Stop!
It's
Why
good.
ASMR? No!
Come here, have some ASMR, Bryce.
No!
Your sister's like, your turn.
Get this satisfied.
Dude, there's an
you can
ASMR
listen
for
here.
my mom.
That's
It's
great for a
so
special
irritating.
person.
Yeah,
Soul. That's
it's
why
like
no one's
taps
there.
on it when you're very busy. Pretty good. She talks to my son like,
He's not there.
my
He doesn't
inside.
exist.
Change my name right now. I'm gonna change your life for living.
Oh, what a roast! Oh my god!
That's so clever.
Kill all of you.
Oh my god. Rest of the song.
When that
We sing the rest of the song. He's like,
I have only listened to the song once.
I don't even think you
That was on the Blaze.
It was on the way.
I was a C-Rock kind of guy.
I know, same. I do.
Bryce doesn't like say it. Bryce, yeah, I don't think you're a C-Rock.
oh wait, this way. I'm watching Geo.
I watch it too.
This is getting because I'm
Hey, no, that's the point. Hey, get the flower thing. Now he's white. Dude, that's pretty cool. I've never actually played this game.
What?
Well, I think I might have like played it once. So, like, Bryce, did you think I was like,
Yes, I did.
so like I just played it 3 minutes ago.
Hey, you say some odd stuff sometimes, Jaden. I wasn't sure. No,
Get it, Bryce? The last thing.
He's watching me. No, he has not watched
He
any.
watched it.
I watched it all the way back in 2018. Dang it! Stop taking
It's not important.
Oh my gosh, why is I the one who is not hit?
Because you're you like
Yeah, winner. Yeah. You're so good.
Why are you running, Matt? Are you like scared? Oh, Bryce got him. Oh, don't do it. Don't do it, Bryce. You know I can battle that, right?
Hit Donkey Kong. You could have just hit Donkey Kong. What's wrong with you? Were you born in a cave?
I knew Bryce was gonna avoid me.
Well, you would have just defended and then these other people, they don't think about the whole defense. I don't do it either.
I'm not saying I'm.
Oh my gosh, how did you hit me?
I don't even know. I thought
I
I
was
was
on the other side.
Well, I mean, you are using Pichu.
That has nothing to do with it.
Once you use Pichu, you're automatically going to be.
no.
Die, little boy.
Why'd you do that?
Die.
Wait, what was that?
See, everyone's chanting my name.
Yes.
No, yeah, my name too.
I think it's everyone. Hey, let's go. Keep
It's everyone minus
No, don't you kill. I'm doing it. Emo. And back off. Thank you very
Oh,
much.
shut up.
Hi.
You idiot.
Go. Go.
You guys donate V-Bucks.
No, here, I'll donate V-Bucks to you. Just give me your social security number.
No, I saw this meme where this girl, she posted a picture of her credit card saying she lost her new background, and then someone asked her what the back numbers are, and then she posted
What?
and then someone stole her credit card number.
I will.
That is a genius.
And then, I kid you not, she said someone was using my old one, and then she posted a picture of her new one.
What the heck?
She just wants to keep it.
Yes. I'm pretty sure she gets insurance. So honestly, it might be just a good.
Got him.
I legit sure.
Baby, he got me.
Oh, see, stay. What?
Got him.
Yeah,
Got him.
I think it's same.
Got him.
Dang, I did not even go up there. I will ground pound in the corner, everyone. I will do it. You know I will. No. I don't want to die, mommy.
How did I not reach?
I think it was Minecraft. I think that's what it comes down to.
Why did you just waste that? No, it was because they didn't mean to.
Holy cow! A double kill. Oh my god, you gotta love that.
Keelan, die already. When would I ever die? Keelan, just die so I can get my safety point that I had before. Too long.
I'm gonna just do what Alex said.
Like, not watching.
I know, I just spread it out.
Did you see anything?
Oh, finally,
Did
Trevor.
you see anything? I thought you did the other one.
The other one.
Oh, wait, there's three. Did you?
No, that's Nathaniel. Nathan.
Nathan above all.
Did you see anything? Send your love. What about
I'm
you?
busy on life.
Oh, man.
School.
Yeah. Like not playing Fortnite.
I
Stop.
watch it too.
I know, I am not.
Wait, what movie?
John Wick 3.
Oh, no. How'd you hit me?
Yeah,
I
Don't even doubt it.
Mostly because it was just fine.
it's not my fault.
How
Yeah,
can you
I'll
still
be
make
the
fun?
entire Fortnite game about.
I like Keanu.
Yeah, I know. I saw it happen. It was
Dude,
sad.
you know,
Actually, they said they didn't have room for me.
What did you try?
It's just my own right now, so they told me back to Thursday.
No.
Because they didn't have room.
I don't want to die, mommy.
But I'm also happy at the same time. Because they're not that far.
no.
He should be in seventh grade.
Oh, that's why you're going out.
Like, oh, like, can you do it?
Stop it, Jaden. Why do you do this? Oh my gosh, got him.
Why do you sound like a little girl when you say that?
How did I use?
I have no idea. I'm just gonna go with it.
Yeah.
No!
My boy.
Oh, fucking you so many times next round.
Little C.
Hi, Caleb. You mind jumping off the map for me once? Come on, well, can you be a nice
You know, I don't
friend?
like it. And I feel bad that I do that to everyone else.
Wait, why isn't the stick working?
No!
Yeah.
Ah!
Oh,
Wait,
is this yours?
unplugged again. Okay, no, stop.
Ah!
You didn't even know.
Stop.
It's
unplugging.
Yeah.
Stop.
Nathan unplugged by the
Stop
because
it!
he falls on
Just
my
take a chill pill. Please! Whoa!
Too far, Nathan. We don't talk about what goes down. No,
Caleb.
How much you
Ow!
have to talk about it, Jaden?
Wait.
How much you have to talk about it?
Stop, Nate, stop.
You can dodge my
It's working. You want it around. It's
I know,
working.
but the beat's not working.
Who needs these? You don't need it. You don't need to spam your secret.
Look, every time I try to go forward, I crash. See, like that. Watch that.
Roasted.
Okay, wait, stop.
Right? This is help
Nathan,
it.
everyone can see your underwear. Too far, Nathan.
Alright.
Statement.
Yeah, they made a good shot that turned into a bad one. No, the
It
pump,
has like 20 shots.
the pump was good.
Yeah, they took out the pump.
Yeah.
They left the tactical though.
Yeah!
It was only because the controller
No,
broke.
no,
While it was broken.
Yeah.
Nate, you killed me while it was broken. That was totally your fault.
Yeah, I
I go
know.
for it.
It's Jaden's fault.
I call Jaden controller.
You can't call controller until you call your soul.
I'm unplugging you so many times.
I'm gonna plug people
No one's playing at all.
Okay, got it.
Don't plug my
Hey,
phone
my
on, you
foot
won't plug
might
your leg
move
from
while
the
it's
socket.
on the ground. I can't move.
You have like the biggest chair. You can literally use that like a bed.
I do not want to make you feel better. That's my leg like that.
I don't care if I feel bad for people because I don't feel bad for people.
Oh my god.
They all
I'm done.
suck.
Back. Come over here. Come on.
No, like him.
I love my
We're having a little extra before.
Oh,
Like you just come out and
that was suck.
You have to stand still. Still.
Steel. I have to see
I
it.
just stood
Steel.
still.
Steel cut out.
You have to wait for your turn to go back on.
well, shoot. Like
That's what I did, and I just died because I got like one time. How did that?
That's how I feel.
can we all agree to yell at me? That's not like a good
So we
idea.
all
I
agree.
could do it.
You're the best guy for that.
Here we forbid.
Yeah,
If you
boy.
wait like 5 seconds, he was gonna give you.
Some people are like, President, I think we're gonna have to start a military coup. I'm like, I forbid you to start a coup.
Why would they tell him they're starting?
Well, that's a good question.
You're so dead now, Caleb. You're so dead. Oh, yeah.
Yes,
I
you're
wouldn't want
wrecking
them to
these
take
kids
over.
with them PK. What is PK?
I got you sniped.
In the video.
Yeah, I can tell you, buddy. Fight me, bro.
He is fighting you.
Yeah, I am.
He fought you and killed you once already. He doesn't need to do it again. It didn't let you kill me.
I know.
Oh, snipe!
I'm gonna pull a Dr. Phil and see if
Okay, yeah,
I hate when people say they're gonna like you're gonna kill them and then they start.
yeah,
Did she buy some of it?
she just felt that. Feel like,
Oh, wait.
yeah, she's
Really, just take it, please.
I'm not gonna take it. You know,
I live right next to
Wow, you gotta love that F stuff.
really nearby, but I
juice. Parkour.
What the fuck are?
Oh, good!
I'm a Michael Scott kind of guy.
Oh, man, Daniel!
Oh man, I'll see you. I'm sorry, I'll try for my part. Bye, Phil.
Now you see how I feel.
Promise I won't stop.
Yes,
I'll
you
take
do.
blue as not because I come back to that.
You're going there. You keep getting punched in the face.
I knew that boy was in trouble, and I was right. I was right, Tessa. Okay. Are we publicly?
Not tonight.
Yes, you're winning. Oh my god.
You can always tell
I know, right? Yeah,
I thought he was bad, but no.
I don't win.
It's not.
I just lose.
It is only good in
I
silence.
just lose very slow.
Yeah.
I still end up losing.
Next
Actually,
week, come in.
What's happening,
You see
Gil?
whatever people say. Shit, you're winning.
Oh!
What you're like.
Yeah, we'll have a
I don't even have 40 lives, but I'm somehow lose.
Oh! Oh! I came in! I came in
I
too!
wasn't paying attention.
I'm sure you were.
No, I wasn't.
You know, it's all losers.
You still 0%! Oh my god! I mean, you've got a life down, but you've been sitting right at this for like.
Got him again, George.
Yeah, George.
You don't want to miss certain ones.
Got him again, George.
Oh, this is easier. What do you not care about? That's easier than knowing all the ones you want to catch. What do you not care about? What do you not like?
Stop talking about Keanu Reeves.
I'll show you a list.
How dare you? Shut your mouth.
There's certain things
He
I
is
do.
though. In every
There's certain
way.
things I do for training. I'm not gonna adjust it for you.
Oh no, Michael Scott is also
I can
Michael
do
Scott,
small.
which is like the world class style. Also, Prison Mike. I mean, I don't like Keanu Reeves, but I don't think he's as hard as Prison Mike.
What's the overweight version?
Got him.
Bible study.
I know. I
Bible.
know.
My
Sit down.
Hang on, my life.
So I don't think I have time to set up the years to do this lot.
Stop attacking me, Mac.
I know what it's. No, I just now it's so good. No,
Well,
Why
you
did
know,
I die?
you can wake up. You can do it. You can bring it to date. I don't need to let my parents in advance. Only the other side. Let me know.
you know, high school.
No, not doing that. Nope.
I was at it. I was at the meeting.
No, maybe we should kill it.
And I was and I'm like, and
Then you would die and you wouldn't have to worry
oh, oh my god. I'm like, dude, you want to say that again for me, please? Like, I really wish you would.
She's all it's gonna do is
Boom! They collapsed. You like fold it over and just collapse.
well, you
Now what's up? Oh, you want to say that again?
I'm trying to take out Mac.
Oh!
Stop targeting me.
Ooh, why are you bullying the face,
I'm
baby?
not bullying you.
Yeah, you are.
Stop
It's the face of
attacking
the
me.
West Coast.
Yeah, you were
CBS
teasing
breaking the
You're teasing a little
West
boy.
Coast Yankee. They sound big.
You know, a lot of people think this is the size of America.
Yeah, I
Well, you stop it.
used to be broke.
Oh, I'll say this.
How do you do that? How do you do that? Stop.
Yes.
Buddy, I should have got that anywhere else. Yeah. No one cares about you.
That's what you should buy, Dave.
Even though my kid should have did no, you should.
My thing should have been.
Oh! Oh!
Yes, I finally
and you're at 3-5.
No, you don't
It
really
went
play
off.
games, guys. We're just-
No, hey.
You would have hit my hand. I would have actually had to rip your esophagus out slow.
Oh, okay.
It would not be good. Bro, stop. You like see
Stop going after me, Nick.
Why
You
you're
wanna
the
see-
you're the talent here?
I just see someone get hit in the face. I
You're a scam.
Okay, no,
Not really, actually, but it's still late.
this
Wait, what?
I did it, I did it.
Yeah, that's the whole point.
Oh, you're not catching my bad. No, I'm gonna skip it. I'm gonna skip off the table. You're supposed to catch it. I didn't say you wanted to run that. Tomorrow's my last day of school. Oh, wait, alright, ready? I'm trying. No, you touched it! I did not touch it! No! Actually, no! Ah!
Oh, the one hit. That
Oh
was
my gosh, this one's so good. Oh. We have a girlfriend. Hey, we have a girlfriend.
So what was the first one?
She's good. You admitted too. You admitted that she's good too. She
Play
does
home, play video games 2 hours, do homework, go to bed.
No. No. Ah,
The bonus thing is when you actually do it.
yeah, I should win.
Wake up, do schoolwork, go to school, come home, stay up
And she
until
goes to
11.
TV, baby.
You just should do it at her house. No, she's like so crazy. Dad. Yeah, the light?
Oh, so you're not in here.
It's behind. It's behind one cup. It's behind 2 degrees.
Everybody grab a chair! Time for a game! I pretty much took my plane ticket back on me so I could go to the game. Because I forgot that I was selling my farm animal.
Until
Yes.
And I look at the calendar, I'm like, wait a minute.
Until you lost. But
So,
right before that.
I would have been leaving for France tomorrow,
Right, there's someone behind you.
but I'm leaving for France next Wednesday at 10. I mean, not 10.
Third one.
At 11. Will you get me one? At 11, I'm leaving next Wednesday at 11.
Leon, are you
At
joining the
11:30.
group?
At night, right? Oh my god.
Take it on show.
Leon, are you joining the girls?
Good show.
Oh crap. Wait a minute.
Zane is the
Wait
one
a
here.
minute.
Oh, you really want the
No,
girls.
Zane is the cutoff.
Nathan really wants the
Oh,
girls.
Zane is the cutoff.
Yeah.
Oh. Mo, move.
Oh, there's nothing in this puppy. Oh, wait. Oh! Oh, yeah! This is it. This is Oh, look at him! Stop! Do you even know who that is?
I'm gonna text his
He's
baby.
an actor who plays Zane. Do you know what I'm playing?
Because I would have to
I
switch
do.
over.
I'm the Zane game.
Because of my data.
Don't play that guy.
I've been talking about
And I'm not trying to figure it out.
How dare you?
That's like
they related?
Yeah.
They look incredibly similar.
Actually, no.
I got
One,
money.
I don't even need the other one bucks.
Visual.
The other one is the best.
There's a reason that there's no Lolo. There's a reason. Isn't that right?
Pastel is my babe. I heard the song.
Also, where were you
Stop
guys?
playing.
I feel like you were gone.
I'm not kidding.
What?
Were you gone?
We were gone not last week, but the week before, I think.
Oh, okay. Hey, Dion, did you not do the stomp, the stomp, the stomp, the stomp? Thanks.
Yeah.
No, no, no.
Both at
Let's not,
once.
let's not upgrade it. Let's downgrade it. Okay, so the name game is very simple if you haven't played. The object is to learn the names of the people who are here with you, sitting in these very chairs. If you know their names, then you will do fine. If you think under pressure well, you'll do fine. If you don't know anybody's names, you've got some ground to cover. Likewise, if you also freeze up under pressure, I'm sorry, you've already lost. The first step in the game is to learn everyone's names as quickly as you can, so we're just going to go around and say our names one time.
Tessa.
Tessa.
Samara.
Samara.
Brianne.
Brianne. Trinita.
Alex.
Alex. Zane.
Bryce.
Bryce. Jaden.
Nathan above all.
Everyone.
I'm just going to shorten that one to the first name.
Above all.
Nathan.
I'm glad.
Above all.
Dion.
No, above all.
Dion.
Above all.
Still Dion. Nate.
Jonathan.
Jonathan.
Daniel.
Yeah.
No, your name is Nathan.
Pretty sure
That's
you're
Nathan.
Yeah, pretty sure.
No, let's go with that. Let's go with that. Yeah, it has. I called you Nathan.
Pretty sure Nathaniel.
Never been caught that way.
Well, now you have.
Wait, guys, too much noise. It's only missed the last one. All right, so we got Nate, right? And then we got, anyone catch it?
JR.
JR, good listening.
Caleb.
That's just because we know his name.
Yeah.
Well, okay, that's probably true. Try listening. And then Caleb. Okay, my name's Daniel, by the way.
What's up, dog?
The only name that will
All right, so the game is simple. I'm gonna have Jaden help me out start this game. Stand up, Jaden.
Yeah.
Right, no, I just said stand up. That's all I said. So Jaden's gonna say his own name first, then he's gonna say someone else's name, and that's it. That's his whole part. He just says his name, then someone else's name.
And he whacked somebody.
Okay, and then whoever he names, I'm gonna try and whack him.
So it's pretty much like.
Where are you doing this?
Oh, you want me to start? Right
Yeah,
now?
go
Okay.
ahead.
Jaden Caleb.
Okay. Did you guys see what happened?
Yes.
He said Jaden Caleb. Then it was Caleb. He was the target. I was gonna go hit Caleb. Caleb got out of it though by saying his own name, followed by someone else's name. He said Caleb Jr. Then I was going after JR. Now since JR was right next to Caleb, I didn't have to go very far. And JR got out JR, and then whack, he got nothing else out. So now JR is lost. That means JR is in the middle. I know. Poor guy with his ice cream still on the stick.
That's illegal.
All right, now right here in this moment, there's a mistake I can make. If I sit down before I start the game back up, JR can whack me.
Especially since
If I sit down before I start the game back up. Does that make sense? I gotta start the game before I sit down. Keeps
Daniel,
the game going.
you look tired. You should sit down.
I am tired. Thanks for noticing, man.
Plus he's got ice cream.
I was talking
Daniel.
about Daniel.
Nathan.
I know. He's still got ice cream. Which one?
JR has ice cream.
He said your name.
Nathan.
Slap.
Nathan,
I'll
you
love
seem
every second of it.
tired.
Don't go sit down.
No, I sat down before you gave me. Yeah, you're.
No.
if you sit
Jared.
down-
That still means you lost.
Daniel.
You still lost.
Oh.
You have to start the game before you sit down.
I told you not to sit
He's
down.
like, no, I sat down before you
Nathan,
did.
Jaden.
Jaden Rice.
Bryce Zane.
Zane Dion. Dion Nathaniel. Nathaniel!
Hit him.
Alex! I couldn't think of his name.
Alex.
Alex Tessa. Hit him. JR, hit him. Tessa Brianne.
Hi, my Brianne, name's
Alex Tessa.
I just said Brianne Nate.
Yeah, pick on her.
It's Nate now.
Nate Caleb. Caleb Zane. Zane Dion.
This is not very
Dion Nathaniel.
The man named Bryce
Nathaniel, Brianna.
Nathan.
Nathan.
Now hit him.
Nathan Jaden.
Jake Bryce.
Oh.
Wait, what?
I
thought he was out.
He didn't touch
No, still hit it.
He sat down before he said
Wait,
it.
Tessa.
Still
Still hit him. Put it down.
He gave me Jaden.
Yeah, we're telling you to continue. They
It's
were
JR.
being-
I don't know.
So
Yeah,
we're at.
This is Zane.
Oh, okay.
Zane Dion.
Oh, Dion Nathaniel. You're so annoying. It's just.
Please don't sit down, please.
Don't sit down.
Don't sit down, Ray.
What?
Don't do it. I'm not.
Bryce Zane.
Zane Dion.
Say my name, I'm gonna kill you, Dion Zane.
Got you.
No,
I'm gonna
officially
act.
got you, John.
That was very. Don't sit down.
You know what I mean.
You look like you need to sit.
Nathaniel Jr.
Who's jail?
Johnny.
What?
Tessa.
Wait,
I heard that.
ah!
Samara and Nathan.
Ah!
Gino.
Hit him!
Yeah.
Caleb is that
I am physically the dumbest person in the world.
We can tell.
Jane
Jr.
Hit him! Hit him! Do it!
Whoa, calm down
Guys,
there.
you
Don't
said- you
get
said
too
your name?
hard, buddy.
Yeah, I said your name.
Ignore
J.
the
Nathan.
rules, hit all the
Don't do someone next to you. You're just doing
Oh,
it.
I almost sat down.
Sit down.
Dion Nathaniel.
Whoa.
Okay.
Idiot! You say my name, I'm gonna kill you.
Bump you over as you sit down.
Nathaniel. Nate.
Nate. Tessa.
Tessa Daniel.
Daniel Trinidad.
Alex. Alex Dane. Dane?
True
Dang.
Zane, Zane. True Zane, Zane.
Get him.
Just
Yeah.
sit down.
Get him.
Get
Oh,
him.
yeah.
Get him. Get him. He sat down.
Do you Do I get back up? I already
If you're standing with Jitsu, you're good. You're not it.
No, I'm just gonna be
Hit her, hit her, hit her, hit her.
it. She just thumbs up. Okay.
No, she's
Got a broken wrist, man.
Yeah.
Dude, don't hit the thing with the brace on.
Yeah.
She has to stand up.
You
Oh,
gotta
boy.
stand up and hit.
That's why she was putting up
Not
with
me.
it.
Okay, Nathan Jaden.
Don't know
Gideon.
who any of you are.
That's a
Yeah.
very good point. We'll try and help you.
Dion Nathaniel. Nathaniel. Nate. Nope. No.
Nate
It was a
equals.
good
No, you
try,
have to
Alex.
sit down. Yeah, you have to sit down.
Don't sit down. Don't sit
Don't
down.
sit down. Don't
No.
stand back up. What?
Just say
your name and then
Daniel.
Nathaniel, are you gonna go, Nathaniel?
Yeah.
Come on, Nathaniel. Nathaniel, say your name.
I did.
He just sat down.
I
Nathan
said it
Nathaniel.
circles.
Nathan Nathaniel.
So hit him.
Okay.
Nathaniel Nathan.
You can't
No,
go back.
do
that's
that.
it.
It's out.
Sorry guys, no
Oh,
double
God.
I'm gonna
pass
sit
back.
down again.
Nope.
Don't sit
Don't
down.
One
sit
pass
down.
back, that's it.
Don't
Don't sit down.
Don't sit down. Okay, good.
Oh.
I said Trinita.
Yeah, you idiot. My name is very similar to
Let me
to
click.
Janita. Jaden.
Jaden is definitely not
The cycle of shame.
You say my name.
It's very
Nathaniel
tough.
Dion. Dion Nathaniel. You can't.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, you can.
One pass.
No,
Oh, okay. Nathaniel
Jaden,
Dion.
you GR.
Alright, Daniel.
Daniel.
Wait, time out. Nathaniel, you called on.
Daniel.
Thank you. Did not go back over there. You guys are not listening.
Wait, you're
Daniel
just telling
Alex.
someone to hit someone else. Alex, Tessa. Tessa, Daniel.
Daniel Samara.
Okay. Samara Bryce. Oh,
Bryce
roasted.
Nathan.
What? Why me? Nathan, Nathaniel.
Nathaniel. That's so annoying.
Alright, so don't sit down.
That was a setup.
Treat Alex.
Alex, Daniel.
Daniel Brianna.
Brian, Caleb. Oh,
Caleb.
roasted.
Nate. Tessa.
This is so annoying.
It's
Tessa.
Tessa.
Jaden.
Never been called.
Jake
that.
Dion.
Theogene!
Yeah. I'm
You
gonna
gotta
say
say
it's not
somebody
been
else's
called
name.
Nathaniel.
JR.
Jersey.
Who?
Zane.
Who?
Daniel.
Daniel Trinidad.
Why? Trinidad Alex. Alex Brand.
Oh my god!
Zane.
Oh,
Zane
Scoop.
Brand.
Oh.
Zane. Why did I say Zane?
You get to sit by two goals. I know it's painful.
Alright.
Actually,
Hit him.
Can I?
Hit him.
Can I? Thank you.
He doesn't want
Wow.
Don't sit.
Can you please hit me?
Don't sit.
I know somebody else needs to be it than him.
I'm
It doesn't
understanding.
matter at this point.
Okay.
How would they say my name?
And
I do want to be it.
He's Caleb.
over there.
Wow. Why do you not know this?
Hold on, baby.
Really? No way.
Hey, Tessa.
Man, what is it? It goes Caleb, Nate, then
Jaden,
Nate,
Jaden.
Tessa.
Yeah, Nate, you always pick Tessa.
Go on.
It's easier if you just keep thinking.
Kind of
Really?
Until they're in the
No,
middle.
no, 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 back up, I'm back up. I'm back up.
Why are you guys so stupid?
Wow.
Were you dropped on your head?
Jaden,
Jaden,
We dropped on food.
Jaden, he's got hair that protects
Yes.
against that. It's cool.
Hey,
Multiple
He's got
times
this
actually.
giant hair.
That's why I look like this.
It's a hairband.
Why are you looking at me?
just say a name.
You know your name?
Yo, Jaden.
Oh, setup.
Oh,
What a setup.
Set up.
Say my
Set
name.
up.
Say my name.
You say my name.
How do you want to be it?
You grew like an inch.
In the past month.
Nathaniel.
Wow.
Right.
Bryce Caleb. Caleb Daniel.
Roasted.
Daniel Nathan.
You know, I'll accept it in a
Nathan
second.
JR. Jared.
In a second.
Collateral
That
damage.
was so
My
close.
chin will never be the
Zane
same.
was like,
Say my name.
You injured me.
I just thought it was like a
Zane was like,
cliche.
ow.
Yeah, you get up.
Don't sit down, Jaden.
I might
Say my
sit
name.
down.
Oops.
Jaden.
You can't take me.
No, I know his name. I'm just
Jonathan.
trying to remember it. Jonathan, I knew that. Jane
Jonathan
Jonathan.
Daniel.
Daniel Zane.
Zane Brand.
You're an Alex.
Why'd you look at me?
That Alex, Caleb. Caleb.
Daniel.
Like,
Sit down, don't sit down.
Say my name.
sit down, JR.
He's like,
I mean, you always like sit down and get back up like super fast.
dude, Daniel's really ready
Jared.
to slap someone. Was that my name?
Yep.
wanted it. I wanted
Oops.
Oh,
Don't sit down.
I actually wanted to be up.
Yeah,
I just wanted to slap you for no
That's
reason.
fair. That's fair. Daniel Jaden.
Jane JR.
I'm not JR.
I know.
Jared.
That's-
What was that?
Zane.
Not ever so
Zane,
slight.
you have mascara on.
What?
Zane.
You
I
know,
don't
someone
know,
tries
I
to
was
say
asking.
my
You
It's
have
probably
your
dark
own
circles
eye
under my eyes
mascara.
from not sleeping.
You gonna start this or what?
Why don't you?
I thought I had
Why are
got
you
it.
convulsing? You're
Zane
like,
Brand.
I know, I tried to
It's
jump
the
up
same
and I
athlete.
ran. No one
I
learned.
said Brand.
Me and Zane.
Zane Dion.
Dion Nathaniel. Nathaniel Dion.
I
have no other name to think of. I know.
That's
Just
a rough
said
state.
Dion.
Dion, Dion.
No, that's actually really confusing for the hitter.
Nathan Nathaniel.
Whoa, calm down
Not.
there,
It's not like
buddy.
they have anger issues, right?
No, nothing.
Come on, Dion. Come on. You're holding up everything.
Dion, you look tired. You should take some.
All right. What's in your pockets? No way, he doesn't
You
know.
realize that I feel. I'm not dumb.
You're not.
Are you though?
Um,
You just say name.
Dion Nathan.
Dion.
No, he slapped
You were
me.
totally hit before.
You were totally toasted.
Why?
The world will never
It
know.
just says I am lonely. See, it's just the same
Daniel.
people. Daniel, it's the same person.
They're just too slow.
Got him.
Nathaniel Dion.
Nathaniel.
Choose somebody else. Jaden, choose somebody else. Choose me.
Your nipples are hard.
I'm.
Please, me and Jade. I want to be it.
Yeah, it's probably not too. Don't, Jaden.
You have to ask first.
Oh, sorry.
It's like a carnival ride.
Yeah.
Not a kid's day. Jaden Grant.
Brian Samara.
Samara Tessa. Tessa Jaden.
The Jade. She said me. Jane Dion.
Alright, let's game!
No!
Well done, all of you. Go ahead and find your call.
Give me a Bible.
Alright.
That's gonna be Pokemon.
Calm yourself. Check yourself, boys. Calm yourself. Please and thank you. Can it be 9 o'clock already?
What?
Can it be 7 o'clock in the morning already?
Stop your Bible.
Don't get
Can I get a Bible?
No.
Bryce, give me
Right, give me service.
If you guys want to scoot kind of back and forth, Cuneo, so everyone can see the screen.
No, thank you, Daniel.
Yay.
Did he ask?
Did he ask?
Stop flexing.
More.
Because you gave up.
Stop flexing.
I know. And I called on you. You had not called on that once. That was pretty cool.
I called
I
him.
was gonna call on you.
Maybe he didn't.
Yeah, I called on you right after I got hit.
I failed in my strategy. It was working really good
Shut
so
up.
far. I just started at Tessa, and every time someone called me, I just moved one down the line. So I called Tessa, then I called Samara, then I called Brianna, then I called Cuneo, then I called Alex, then I called Zane, then I called Jaden, and then I got moved, and I lost track. All right, it is the end of the road, ladies and gentlemen. We've made it. We have finally made it. The entire history of the world is now over. We did, for you guys who missed it, or you're new, whatever the case is, we've been doing something special the last 6 weeks. We've been doing 1,000 years every night, starting at creation. And just, this is what I was renouncing it for all those who've missed nights, or who are new. So, I'm glad you're one of them, because that's why I was saying it. You heard me. Good job. Or for those who forgot.
I thought those were AirPods.
That's fair. That's fair. All right, guys. So here we go. Here's the summary of the entire world in 6 parts. There it is. We're not on this, and that is intentional because that is what tonight is all about. We did 1,000 years every night for 6 nights, and now we caught up to 1997. Tonight we're going to cover everything from 1997 up until today.
We gotta cover Donald Trump.
Okay. So I did all this research on timelines and who's been serving as president. You know what a fun fact is? Fun fact: President Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Trump were all born in the same year. No, not Barack Obama. Tell a lie.
Yeah, I was like.
He was like one of the youngest presidents in history. Sorry, it is 3 presidents though. I just got the wrong one. So it's Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump. We're all born in the same year. They're all born in 1946. The year after the bomb dropped in Hiroshima. Isn't that interesting?
Hiroshima and
That's
Nagasaki,
interesting
right?
considering Donald Trump's the next president and George W. Bush was like years ago.
Right, because Obama had 2 terms.
Wait, it's
There's
Hiroshima.
8 years in between them, and George W. Bush had 8 years too.
That shows you how old Donald Trump is.
He's the oldest president we've ever had.
Really?
Isn't the other one Nagasaki?
We went from Obama, who was the youngest president we've ever had, but only just barely. Like we had some that were really close, but he just edged him out. We went
How
from
old is
that
Obama?
to Trump, who's the oldest president we've ever had.
I guess.
How old is Donald Trump?
Obama was in his mid-40s when he entered office.
He's like 72.
45, 46. That's like the youngest we ever had, because you have to be 35 to even run for president. All right, so here we go. Here's the entire world all spaced out. We started off with the creation of the world and everything in it. Then we got to sin entering the world through Adam and Eve. Then we got the first death as Cain killed his brother Abel. Way over here on the other end of that 1,000-year chunk, we got Enoch being taken off into heaven without having to die. Yeah.
But that's not what the last death is, isn't it? Like, that's where the first death is.
It's the first death.
I thought are you guys talking? Are you talking
Cain
about?
murdering Abel.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, it's the first death.
Cool. Then down here on the second set of 1,000 years, we got the flood with Noah and the ark right here. The ice age that lasted about 400 years. Right here is where about it starts. Then shortly after that, the Tower of Babel was built. Still not everyone's moved out into the world, but the animals have. The people were just like being stubborn. Then later, after God scatters everyone, they start to cover the entire planet, eventually. Then down in the next chunk, the next week, we covered Abraham making a covenant with God where God promises him a nation that's going to bring forth the Savior of the world. Is going to all come from his descendants. And then down here, we've got some of his descendants, a pair of twins, Jacob and Esau, who fight crazy bad while they're young, but actually manage to patch things up when they get older. Jacob's family ends up having 12 sons in it, and those 12 sons become the 12 tribes of Israel, roughly. There's a few swap outs there.
That was the night I was here.
Oh, okay. Way down here, there's a period of slavery, and then eventually Moses comes along, and he's the one that God uses to walk the Israelites out of slavery. That's about the same time they get the Ten Commandments, they cross the Red Sea, there's manna from heaven, all that stuff you find in the book of Numbers and Exodus. And then we've got the period of Judges that stretches all the way in here. I put this little symbol where it starts. It goes all the way up to the crown. So the time of Judges is one of the darkest, most horrific periods of Israel's history, where everything just gets worse and 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 worse until Samuel comes along. And that's pretty much the only thing that saves it. Yeah.
Can you describe why it was the worst?
I almost don't want to talk about the end of the book. So, Book of Judges, it goes in order chronologically, roughly, and it tells the primary stories of 7 out of like 14 of the judges. So it covers like half of them in great detail. The other half just kind of get a mention. And as you read through, what you get from each of the judges in sequence is each one listens to God a little bit less for a little bit less time. So like the starting judge will be following God and leading the country for like 20 years, and you get to the end, it's like not even 1 year. Like he literally saved the country by being a total jerk who murders people. And that's like the end. And everything in between is just that slow falling off from I was with God for 20 straight years before I disobeyed him to not even once. Not even once. He was just a jerk and God used it. And so everything in between. That'd be Samson. He's at the end of the chain of horrible. So everyone in between is kind of somewhere in between. Just slowly falls down. Until you get past Samson, then it really starts to get bad, where like people anger people and they chop off body parts to show how angered they are, and they start like UPSing the body parts around the country to like let people know this is how bad it's gotten. Please come help me kill people because they're horrible. Like it was really bad, like really, really, really bad. Then after all that, they asked for a king, and God's like, you guys know the whole point of all of my working with you was so that you would treat me like your king. And they're like, no, we want a human king. God's like, okay, I'll give you a human king, but before you get one, I got to outline for you just how bad it's going to be if you get one. Human kings are going to tax you. They're going to take your sons from you and put them in their army. They're going to look around and find the best servants, the best women, the best animals, and just say, oh, mine. And they're just going to take them. And God says, all of this is what you get if you want a king. You're going to take this too. And they're like, yeah, just give us a king. And so he gives him a king, and at first the guy's cool. It's just like judges, where like at first, yeah, follow God, do what he says, yeah. And then slowly but surely the power goes to his head. He starts doing the taxing thing, the army thing, the taking of the sons and the daughters and the animals and whatever he feels like. It just gets worse and worse and worse. That lasts about 40 years. Then they get another king named David. David is the David you might know of from like David and Goliath. David and Goliath, that story that takes place in David's younger years before he's king. It's while that first king is slowly descending into madness and jerkhood. He's just getting worse and worse when David goes to fight Goliath. And when David does that, the whole country goes, oh, he'd probably make a better king. And that just ticks the current king off. It doesn't actually change who's king. The old King Saul just stays king for a while longer, and David is now a hunted man running for his life because the sitting king, the king on the throne, he doesn't want there to be a new king. He doesn't like that idea.
What was the king before David?
Saul.
Was he there when Goliath was like?
Mhm.
There's no one that
He was out there with his army. He was watching the whole thing take place. Yep. Yep. He would be the asparagus, the tall one in that story. So after David is around for a bit, he gets to become king. But he is such a fighter, such a war kind of guy, just going out and leading in battles and crushing his enemies, that when he goes to God and says, God, I want to make you a temple. I want to make you a house that's fitting for you. God says, you kind of got a lot of blood on your hands. I don't really want someone who's killed to be the one who builds my house. It doesn't sit right with me. I'm against murder. I'm against killing. So David says, well, what about my son? What if I have a son? And God's like, yeah, that was kind of my whole plan all along, actually. So David's son is going to be the one who builds God's temple. And so David, since he can't build the temple, he just starts setting up for his kid. He gets all the building supplies. He hires all these artisans to just come and live in the capital and get better at what they do, all waiting for the day when David's not king anymore and his son becomes king. Solomon. I know. Sounds the same, spelled different, different root words. But yeah, Solomon. So then Solomon builds the temple, possibly one of the most ornate buildings ever made. The entire interior was plated in gold. Just all of it. Floor, ceiling, walls, furniture, fixtures, all of it. Bronze columns so big you couldn't move them. I mean, just the craziest, amazing, expensive construction you've ever heard of. After Solomon, though, everything goes back downhill again. After Solomon, the country splits in half. There's a north half, there's a south half. There's prophets who are trying to lead the people, trying to get them back on track, but the kings on north and south, there's almost no good ones. The north half has no good ones the whole time, all the way from here to here. No good kings in the north half. The south half, less than half the kings are good. So at the end of it all, God has sent prophet after prophet after prophet telling them, if you don't shape up and turn your country back in the direction I was leading you, I'm going to have to punish your country. You guys have been doing sinful, horrible things to each other this whole time. I can't let it go. And so after a bunch of warnings, he finally sends punishment. Neighboring empire comes and destroys them. Babylon smashes the whole city, just breaks it down, kidnaps the people, puts them into slavery for 70 years. After 70 years, the Babylonians get conquered. Yeah.
What does the whale represent?
Jonah.
Jonah.
That's where it happened on the timeline. It's just one of the prophets. I put two of the prophets on there by what they're most known for. Elijah, for when he made the altar and the fire came down from heaven and just obliterated the altar, which won him a contest, which is pretty cool. And then Jonah being eaten by the whale. Just the most recognizable thing. So I put a guy with a beard, like, no one would know which one I was talking about. Just be like, all of them. So,
Question: why did God send the flood before all the terrible stuff happened?
ooh, good question. Actually, all the terrible stuff was happening. This is all just pre-Israel. So this is terrible stuff in Israel. This is all pre-Israel existing. Israel didn't actually exist until this family existed. Pre this, there was just everyone. There wasn't a country that God chose. There wasn't a people that God chose. God was just working in everyone's lives, talking to everyone. And Noah, at this point, was the only guy left on the planet who was listening. So starting off with Adam, who got to walk and talk with God. All the way down the line, God was trying to talk to every single person on the planet. And by the time of Noah, he was the one guy left. So I don't know if you want to do like a standard distribution of like a bell curve. Like, at some point there was a lot of people listening to God, somewhere around like Enoch's time, and then it just kind of sloped from Enoch down to Noah. I don't know.
The population grew and then the population
It reset. Because there's 8 humans on the ark. So once that flood hits, boom, you go from crazy population to 8. It's a fall off on the
There were
ground.
only 8 people in there.
That's it.
And like
Eight humans.
multiple animals. How come like all those movies? It's like
Why do the
Animals.
predators not eat the prey?
I said 8 humans.
And just like his family, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so it's Noah and his wife, 3 sons, their 3 wives. That's it.
Wives?
Well, there's 3 sons, so they each have 1 wife.
Oh, I'm like.
Come on, do the division here.
So
So
they
4
were the
gals,
only
4
people
guys.
that survived.
That's it.
I mean, the dad.
Worldwide flood. Now, remember, at this point, the lifespans of the humans were extended. At this point, we have humans living up into the 900 years old. So, like, Adam literally lived almost to the end of this bar. Isn't that weird?
That's like almost 1,000 years.
Yeah, it's like 939. Or was it 9? Yeah, 939 for Adam. 950 for Adam? I can never remember Adam's right. The oldest guy was 969. That was like the longest life. Yeah.
Sorry, another
No,
question.
please.
What did God do to stop the predators from eating the prey? And how did
Probably
he
whatever he did to get them there. Because like Noah didn't have to go out and catch animals to put them in the ark.
He just, like,
God
teleported
says,
them?
get the boat ready. I'll bring you the animals. So if God can get animals from every corner of the globe to migrate to Noah, he could
Or maybe he
easily
just
get them to
built-
just, you know, keep their peace for a year on the boat.
I wonder how long that took to like actually get the boat like to get there.
It could have taken probably as long as building the boat.
Or God could have just.
I don't know. God could have started years earlier.
Or he could
I
have
have no idea.
made new animals.
Could have opened portals. I don't know. He has a lot of options being God. A lot of options. You ever see Narnia where you like go in the cupboard and like you're somewhere else?
Yes, and the man with the
I
hooves.
sometimes think there are bushes like that God has scattered around he just doesn't tell us about. Just
That'd
like
be
step into one
awesome.
bush, come out of a different bush somewhere else.
It's like Disneyland's
Secret shrubbery entrance.
Except it's just
I don't know. Alright, so where do we leave off in the timeline? They go into slavery for 7 years in Babylon. Babylon gets conquered. The incoming nation that takes over the Medo-Persian Empire, they let the Israelites go back. They rebuild the temple eventually. They later rebuild their capital city and slowly start rebuilding the whole country until the Romans come in. And there's this crazy fanatical guy from the Roman side of things that wants to get rid of all religions that aren't the Greek and Roman god system. He is so on fire about the Greek and Roman god system, this pantheon of gods for every job, that if you don't worship that, in addition to your religion,
You
like
die.
you can keep yours, but you have to also worship the Roman and the Greek gods. Not you die, but that's one of the options. You go to prison, you could die, you could have all your money taken away, all your property taken away, just like turned into a homeless person. There were multiple options he had at his disposal. One of the things he tried to do, because the Jewish people just said, no, our primary tenet, like the first thing is, don't worship any other gods. It's like the first big deal in Judaism is don't worship any other gods. The second one, don't have idols. Like don't carve a thing and then worship it like it's a god. And this is literally the things they're being asked to do, is to worship the Greek and Roman gods and have idols. So they just say no. And so the guy says, well, then I'm going to mess with you. I'm going to go into your temple and I'm going to do the thing you don't want me to do. So he gets all of his guards together. He goes in the temple. He takes a pig, which is a anti-sacred animal, like the opposite of sacred for the Jews, whatever that is. That's pigs. Like you're not supposed to touch them. You're not supposed to raise them. You're not supposed to eat them. Like you just stay far, far away from pigs.
No bacon?
I don't know why, but that's one of the rules. So they,
Bacon's better anyway.
he takes a pig, he brings it in the temple, he puts it on the altar, and he sacrifices the pig on the altar, not to God, but to Zeus. Yeah,
Where did he get the pig? If you're like not supposed to raise pigs, what did he
that's a
get?
really good question. At that point in history, their country, Israel, was not entirely inhabited by Israelites. There were other people living in that country. Some of them were Roman officials, and Roman officials got their way because they had the army. So if a Roman official feels like eating pork, he's going to bring pigs with him into the country. So somehow there was pigs in the country. I don't know. We didn't get that part written down in the history books, because I don't think he told anyone. He just walked up with a pig one day. Yeah.
There was a dude that I'm forgetting the name of for some reason.
That's fine.
But he sacrificed like a goat to God. But isn't Satan usually depicted with like goat hooves? So wouldn't goats
Interesting
be
question.
anti-sacred instead of pigs?
Yeah. So the pig thing came from God. That's like God saying, don't do pigs. That's not okay. Whereas the goat thing came from humans.
Okay.
Like God never actually associates Satan and goats.
Oh.
That's actually just people associating them. So like we made that up. Like Satan having a pitchfork at all, that's not in the Bible. That's literally just us wanting to draw a picture of Satan came up with that image.
Ooh, I think
So like him looking like a goat, not real. I mean, as far as what God's told us, Satan is beautiful. He is like
Because he used to be an angel.
exactly, and on top of that, like he was up there in the rank of angels. He was at the top.
But why
So
did he choose
for him to
eat?
be a goat,
Daddy issues.
I have a big question that has
that's not bad.
all
I like that.
all my life.
All right, so
I have a big question that's confusing me.
yes,
How did Satan become evil if there was no sin or like anything like?
He didn't become evil
Well,
necessarily.
how did he
only
get that
opposed
mind?
God
Like how
because
did
he had
like,
free will.
Free will and self-interest. It's all you really need.
but that's sin.
The only way to keep free will at bay is to lose your self-interest, to be humble, to put others first, primarily God, and then everyone else second.
The first
If you don't keep God first and everyone else under Him and all of that above you, you start sinning. It's automatic. And so the problem with Satan was he started out in a position where he was higher up than all the other angels, but he wasn't higher than God. And the ability to be higher than the other angels started feeding his ego. He started noticing, well, I am. And technically he was better than the other angels.
But now he's
Because
not.
God created him to be that way. So he was recognizing what God did, but he let it get to his heart. And he started to become prideful in his position. And the same thing can happen to us. We can go into a position as someone who's humble, and we might come out the other side prideful. Sometimes we're the youngest in a family for a really long time, and then someone else is born. And it messes with us so hardcore because we were so used to being the youngest. The one that everything was about for a long time. And then when someone else comes along, it really messes with you. So for Satan, the trip was this. He wanted the angels to just take a minute, just a few seconds out of the day, and worship him. Just a little bit. I mean, God's better than me, yeah, but I'm better than all the angels. Shouldn't they recognize that? Shouldn't they appreciate me for all this hard work I'm doing?
No.
So he wanted to take the focus off God and put it on him. And that was it. That was the first step. That's all it took. One thing just led to another. It keeps snowballing bigger and bigger and bigger until he's got a big pride complex. He wants to be worshipped just like God. He wants to be on the same level as God. Worship continues to this day to be the big deal for Satan. Worship is his biggest deal. Yeah.
Wasn't it in I think it was the Divine Comedy that it was said that no, it was not the Divine Comedy. It was another book that I'm forgetting the name of.
That's fine.
Basically, a book. Actually, it was really cool because it was originally written in English, but it was about Adam and Eve in the garden and Satan's journey. That described it as when Jesus came along in heaven, not in earth. Satan became jealous of him
Interesting.
because he became God's new favorite because
I
he
would
was meant
love
to
to
be
know
the
the name of the book because I
I
don't
will
know
try and find it.
what you're talking about, so I
Sorry.
can't comment. No, that's fine. You're allowed to just bring up things I don't know, please. But since I don't know the source, I don't know what to say exactly. But I'll say this because I know this part of the story you just said contradicts the Bible. There's one part you said, and that's the when Jesus came along. See, according to the Bible, Jesus is as eternal as God because he's part of the Godhead. And so Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit, those three in the Trinity,
So they just like
pre-existed angels because they made the angels.
So was Satan above Jesus when he first came along?
No, because Satan didn't exist. Jesus never had a come along moment. That's the contradiction.
No, I mean when Satan came along.
Oh, when Satan came along. Yeah, yeah.
How was Satan the head of the angels if Jesus was already an angel?
But Jesus is not an angel. No. If I did, I misspoke. I'm sorry. Jesus, not an angel. Jesus, part of the Godhead. Part of the Trinity.
And the Godhead is
God.
So God's part of the Godhead and the
God
Godhead.
is a word that refers to all three. The Trinity.
So Jesus is God?
Yes. Does that make sense? So he wasn't an angel, he wasn't created. That's Jesus. Not created, not an angel.
I mean, three people part of the Godhead. Triangle has 3 points.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's where Trinity gets its root word from. So I don't know the book. If you can figure it out, or I'll look it up later if I can. I'd be interested to see who wrote it and why, and, like what's the story and why did they write it, and all that.
It's not a modern book. It's an older book.
That's fine. I'd still like to know. I'm just curious. So, anyways. All right. We gotta get to new stuff. Sorry, I'm taking too long on this old stuff. Okay, so from here to here is a big blank in the Bible. This is the split between the Old and New Testament. It's about 400 years long. We only know about this part from outside the Bible, from history books. Then we get to here. This is the birth of John the Baptist. What you're seeing there is a smidge of the honeycomb wand thingy. What do you call that? Is that a comb?
Those cute things they have on like the Honey Nut Cheerios.
That thing,
Cute
yeah,
things.
that
Yeah,
thing.
they're cute.
And then a locust, because he ate honey, he ate locusts. Then you've got the birth of Jesus 1 year later. In this little time span, he lives his whole life and then dies on the cross. Shortly after that, he rises from the dead, and Christianity takes off. So this whole time, no Christianity doesn't exist yet. During that point, you have Judaism and pre-Judaism. Before Abraham, you have pre-Judaism, just God talking to people. So about a third of the world's existence, no Judaism, no Christianity. About another third of the world's existence, Judaism, but still no Christianity. And then the final third of the world's existence, Christianity and Judaism. Isn't that weird? It's kind of interesting. It divvies up nicely. Then after Christianity takes off, it becomes #1 persecuted enemy of Rome. And eventually, over much time, it eventually turns into the state religion of Rome. After that, in a totally different part of the world, a guy named Muhammad is born, and from Christianity, he gets enough ideas, he starts his own religion called Islam. Later on in the century, invention takes off, and I do mean takes off. We start off with things like gunpowder and block printing, and it just screams forward from there. This last 1,000 years is chock full of invention, and there's just more the more you go through the timeline. Right around here, around 1000 AD, is Leif Erikson, who made the first trip over to North America since probably the Ice Age. If someone else made it between those times, we don't know about it. There's no record of it. There's no evidence of it. But somehow Leif Erikson made it. He came through Greenland, which makes the trip a little bit shorter. Then we get down to the Crusades, a very sad time where after the troops of the Islamic faith took over large pieces of the Middle East, kicked out the Jews, kicked out everyone, took over Jerusalem. Christians decided, you know what we should do? We should just start a war with people because reasons. And they decided to go on like 9 different campaigns to go try and take back things like Jerusalem and surrounding cities. Pretty much all failed horribly. If they succeeded, they were usually beaten shortly thereafter. Each of the 9 lasted on average like 2.5 years. Then you move on down the line, you get stuff like the printing press. This is like the first time the Bible is now an object you can go buy in a store. Before that, you had to know somebody. Like you literally had to know a guy who had one, and then you had to get blank paper, and then you had to copy it from his. But now that there's printing presses, one of the first books ever made, the Bible. Prior to the Bible, there was mostly leaflets and newspapers. But Gutenberg decided the only book he was going to carry in his shop was the Bible. Then you get stuff like the Reformation, spitting out all these different kinds of Christianity, branching off of Catholicism. Prior to this, Catholicism was the major form of Christianity. And that was not because other people didn't want to change things. It was mostly because if you tried to change things, the Catholic Church tended to hunt you down. After the Reformation and Protestant churches and evangelical churches all forming, then eventually you get America starting all the way down here on the timeline. Then we fast forward all the way up to World War I and World War II, where things started to change. We started the ability to communicate across the planet instantly. We didn't have that before. It's what changed World War I and II from being just a war into being a world war. It was the ability to talk about the war faster than a messenger could carry a message. And ever since then, most of our news has been about technology and invention. Most of the things that are happening now center around technology and invention. And that's not all that's happening. It's just what people love right now. It's becoming a religion of its own. All right. And now, with very little time left, we have what's been going on lately. Did you figure out the book? Sweet.
Paradise Lost.
Oh, okay. Right on. Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense.
Wait, what?
It didn't kick in from the description you gave it, but that makes perfect sense. She thought of the book earlier that she was talking about. She figured it out.
I know who.
Paradise Lost. That is it.
Wait,
You don't know
is
it's
in,
okay.
like, Paradise Lost?
No. Different. Different.
No, you see, the paradise
He lived in paradise, so for him it's kind of a sour joke. All right.
No.
So what's been going on lately? Well, in the last 100 years or so, religion has fundamentally changed. You see, back around 1910, which is, I mean, it's really hard to get these numbers for any year you like. You kind of have to take what you get. Around 1910, things like agnosticism, the belief that if there is a God, you really couldn't know it, so it's not really worth thinking about because you can't prove it, Or atheism, the belief that absolutely there is no God. It makes no sense to even think that there's a God. Around 1910, they didn't exist. They were basically not there as far as statistics were concerned. Most of the planet, statistically, believed in some God, some form of religion. You fast forward 100 years, and you can kind of see the change that happens. On this far side, you have 2010. And so you can see Christianity has actually shrunk ever so slightly. Now keep in mind, this is a percentage chart. So Christianity is now a smaller percentage of the global population. But the global population has grown drastically in the last 100 years. So the total number of people in Christianity has grown. But the pie slice, the amount of the world that is Christian, has gone down. Does that make sense? It's hard. I can show you sometime, but this is what I spend my hours doing. I make these things. All right, so Islam, you can see, has grown over the last 100 years. It is getting bigger towards the right. Hinduism, pretty much the same. It's grown, but only a smidgen. Chinese folk religion has shrunk. It did have a slight resurgence lately, but not enough to make this graph a different shape. Yeah.
Oh, never mind. This is 1910.
Yeah, 1910 to 2010.
Because I was like, atheism is way, isn't it? Like, I pretty
No, and that's the funny thing. Because this is measuring the planet and not the U.S., this isn't measuring one country. This is measuring the entire planet. Atheism is minuscule. There are almost no atheists in the world. Does that make sense?
I'm pretty sure they announced like a while ago that there were more atheists than Christians in America.
Still not true. There's more Christians in the U.S. than any other country in the world. We still have the most number of Christians by number. We don't have the most by percentage. We're pretty far down the list like that. There are some countries that are so small and so Christian that it's like 99.99% Christian. But it's because they have like 8,000 citizens. So it's like, you know, all but one. that kind of thing exists. So we don't win by percentage at all. Chinese folk religion has shrunk. It was massive on the planet just because of Chinese population. China was a huge population and still is a huge population. But under China's new regime, new is relative, obviously, under them becoming a communist nation, they at first illegalized all religions. At first. They changed that shortly after. But when that happened, it made a huge dent in the Chinese folk religion belief system. Buddhism has largely stayed the same, hasn't changed much over that 100 years. Ethno-religions have shrunk a little. Ethno-religions generally, it's not one religion. If you're not familiar with the concept, it's basically all the little tribes that all have their completely unique religion. It's not shared by anyone else. It's literally just this one tribe, and they're the only ones who believe what they believe. We lump them together so that they show up on the graph. Because if you don't lump them together, they're 500 people on a planet with over 7 billion people. Nope. That's not a percentage. Like you can't measure that on a graph. It would be less than a pixel. It wouldn't be there. Yeah.
Are Quakers included in Christianity?
I believe they would be. Yes.
Yeah, because technically they're a branch.
Yes. And that's
I'm also
generally
thinking
speaking,
Catholicism
one of the reasons that Christianity stays on top is because of how
There's
many
so many
branches there
branches.
are. A lot of the conversion to Christianity right now in modern post 2010 is actually from Catholicism to a different branch of Christianity. That's where a lot of Christian converts are actually coming from, is from Catholicism. So they're moving from inside Christianity to inside Christianity.
So there's a lot of
It doesn't create
people
growth.
coming from outside.
Even if the church is growing, that doesn't create a bigger slice on the graph.
So it's actually a good thing, because then if people don't like the actual Christianity thing, they can just get their off-brand version, start believing in Christ. You see?
You make a joke,
Genius.
but that's
Smart.
literally what's happening. So just law. That's where we got Mormonism from. That's why we have Seventh-day Adventists being anywhere different at all from the rest of us Christians, is because they didn't like what they saw, they made a new thing. But it's the same thing with a small number of differences. So like we just have all these off-brands. It's getting ridiculous. First Caleb, because he's had his hand up for a century in the journal. That's not true. It's a positive belief that there isn't a God. It's not a negative belief that there is a God. That's
It's like
still
the
not true.
lack of a religion.
So,
is their religion.
Agnosticism is the closest thing you could have to not having a religion. It's basically saying like you can't prove it, so who cares? You're just apathetic to it. Atheism goes the extra mile though. Atheism says there is no God. That's a belief statement. Does that make sense? They believe there is no God. You can call it other things. You can call it materialism, naturalism, humanism, but those tend to be focuses within atheism. Different atheists have different focuses. So women focus heavily on humanity, and they're not into the natural world. They're not into the universe. They're mostly thinking about human traits, human interaction, human qualities, human problems. So they would be more of a humanist. Then there's like the naturalist. That's just like all about physics and atoms bumping into atoms, and everything's random and you can't control anything, including yourself. You are just the randomness of the universe, exemplified in one way, the same way that an asteroid bumping off an asteroid is the randomness of the universe exemplified in one way. And then there's all these different kinds of atheism. It's still a really small pie slice, though. Just by numbers. Yeah. It's generally one of the two. It's either going to be an atheist or an agnostic, but it's not always the case. Yeah.
What are all the
I couldn't bring myself to do it. There's so many up there. This is less than half on the list. This is like the top 8. Was it 8? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, this is the top 8 on a list of like 18.
What are some names?
Zoroastrianism, widely regarded by secular archaeologists to be the oldest religion on the planet. It essentially is, if you took the understanding that Abraham and all those people who got off the ark, and then you just let it pass by word of mouth with no scripture for thousands of years. And you just let it go through myth and legend filters until modern day. So it believes all the same things as Christianity if you strip away the describing words. Like, they believe in a God. He's the one living true God. And sin is a real problem. And everything in this life is about that great struggle between our desire to do evil and God's will to do good. And they get almost every single thing right, except through those thousands of years, they've come up with all these extra traditions and extra things and names for things and rules about things that have nothing to do with what God has revealed and has said. But you can tell the nugget of truth that started this thing, it was legit, because all the big chunks are the same shape as our big chunks, but all the little details are wrong. So that is essentially the smallest religion they track, is Zoroastrianism, because it's in Iran, and it's like one village population worth, and sometimes they even start other villages and move to other villages. But it's essentially as many people as you can put in one village, is the whole religion. It's a few thousand people. But they track it because it's distinct from the others, and it is a monotheistic religion, which is unique. There's not that many monotheistic religions out there. All right, moving on. What else has been changing over these last few years? Well, these are the countries that are growing the fastest right now in terms of Christianity. So these are the top 20 fastest growing countries in terms of how fast Christianity is growing. These are the annual growth numbers. So for Nepal, the fastest growing one, as of these numbers, this is from 2013. We haven't got a new census of this more recently than 2013. I apologize. It doesn't exist as far as I can tell.
What doesn't exist?
More current census numbers. Because remember, this is the world census. You have to kind of wait for all the other country censuses to line up before you can get a world census. So Nepal, that means 11%-ish growth every year. And what that means is every 6.6 years, the number of Christians in Nepal doubles. That's the current growth numbers. It can adjust. It's not always going to be a straight line graph. Sometimes it picks up speed and goes crazy faster. Other times it doesn't. Sometimes it slumps and slows down. But these are the top 21 or 20 countries on this planet growing in Christianity. All right, so check out these continents.
Oh, China is just bad. Why the Caribbean? The Caribbean.
China's the second.
Yeah, okay, area, region, whatever you want to call it. They're not countries.
No, major religion.
So these are major religions in the country listed.
For years, religion was banned in China. Why would you think anything else?
Yep. Well, and technically the government still considers China, not the people necessarily, but the government still considers China an atheistic state. And that And that is an interesting thing. So majority religion in some countries means the government is that religion. They profess that religion, they believe that religion, they support that religion. In other countries, the majority religion just means literally that's what most people are in that country. It's different in different countries. Some countries have very secular governments, some countries have very religious governments. Okay, move on down the charts. Some things you may have noticed. 18 out of the top 20 are in Asia or Africa. So just kind of picture in your head the world map and realize 18 out of 20 countries that are the 20 fastest growing for Christianity are all in 2 basic places. 18 out of 20. They do, but it starts to get more interesting. 11 out of 20 are Muslim majority countries. Interesting again. Not a single country on this list is in Europe, North America, or Latin America. It's interesting. The high Christian growth rate is found in a country with at least one that is majority Hindu, majority atheism, majority Buddhism, majority Muslim, and ethno-religious. So that means literally Christianity is growing no matter what the background is. It doesn't matter what the background is. Is the background of the country Muslim? It's growing there probably. Is the background of the country Hindu? It's probably growing there. Is it atheism? It's probably growing there. Muslim, ethno-religious, it's growing in every environment. And the majority top 20 are clustered in these 3 areas. Eastern Asia, it's not just all of Asia. Western Africa, it's not all of Africa. And the Arabian Peninsula. Okay, now we get to a slightly different chart. This is a chart of persecution against Christians. Now the way this is ranked is using a percentage scale in like 7 different categories, different kinds of persecution. So in some countries it might be all about violence and there's no actual governmental persecution, like the government doesn't care, but local people are persecuting Christians. In other countries, it's just the opposite. Locals don't care. It's all the government. One of the most interesting ones to me, I'd never even heard of until I started looking this up, is Eritrea. Eritrea is a country that didn't really even exist several decades ago. It formed out of a war that finished up in 1991. Now, they were still fighting after the war was over. The war continued to go on for like 3 or 4 more years after it ended in 1991. It's this little guy right here, bumps up against these 2. And in Eritrea, the persecution is really unique. There's less violence against Christians because Christianity is the majority religion. Most of the people there are Christians. Now there are Muslims there, but it's like a 54%, 33% split, and then a bunch of other smaller ones and non-religious people. So most of them are Christians, more than half. But the persecution there is really heavy because the government is anti-everything. They don't want anybody. They're against their own people, whether they're religious, not religious, Christian, Muslim, take your pick. They're mean to everyone. Because it's such a fresh new country, they're able to pull off shenanigans like calling themselves a democracy, and yet they've postponed their elections every time. They've never occurred. They keep setting the date for the election, and it's never occurred. The same people who were in the war back in 1991 when it finished are the same people who are in office right now. The few people that were in office that wanted actual democracy wrote an open letter to the president saying, maybe we could have some democracy since we're considered a democracy. And all 15 of them that signed the letter were immediately imprisoned without a trial. They're still supposedly in prison. We don't know. They could be dead. They could be in prison. We don't know. And so literally anyone that opens their mouth and tries to have freedom in this country is silenced. On top of that, joining the military is mandatory for all young men. So there's no men that aren't in the military. And getting out of the military like, oh, I'm old, I get to retire, isn't even a thing. Because the country hasn't been around long enough for that to happen. It's an insane place right now. But as a consequence, like the violence rate is actually pretty low. You only have like a 54% chance of having violence enacted against you. as a Christian.
The place is called Cuneo.
Uh,
Because it might get
Eritrea.
That reminds me so much of like the Neverending Story.
That's what I said earlier.
Like Atreyu.
Atreyu, I was saying that. I couldn't remember Atreyu's name. I had to ask Emily. She's better at names. So Eritrea is actually second on the list if you reorder this in terms of freedom of media. They're only second to North Korea. North Korea controls their own media, the same as Eritrea. They're nearly tied with each other. Effectively, what this means is, if your neighbor gets treated poorly and you tell someone about it, that's it. Whoever you physically told, that's the end of the trail. No one's going to know about it. On top of this, they don't let outsiders in very often, so very little news ever gets out of the country. People are essentially the number one thing that gets out of the country, and that's the only reason news gets out. Is because when people start to grow up and get close to joining the military age, they get scared, and they just run, and they leave the country.
That's what I would do.
But most of it's a Christian nation. They're just trapped under a terrible government. And so this is the list. This is the top 50 worst places. And effectively what they did was anybody who's above 53.4% in terms of persecution. So if at least 53.5% of Christians are being persecuted on a regular basis, you make the list.
North Korea's number one.
They are. Effectively in North Korea, it is on the books. It is officially illegal to be or become a Christian. The sentence is typically death.
Wait,
Just,
so what if I
just
go to North
officially arrested and killed right then, right there.
So if you go to North Korea, then you won't.
Well, it's different. It's different for North Korea. Going to North Korea is not an open option. You can't just go to the airport and buy a plane ticket to go to North Korea. To go to North Korea requires you to become like friendly and have ongoing conversations with someone who works at a North Korean embassy or travel agency, because their embassies are not allowed everywhere. They put up travel agencies instead, where someone from North Korea works. And if you go in and you apply to enter North Korea, you may be accepted. But once you're accepted, and it's incredibly rare if you are, you only get to go there under very strict laws, very strict tours, where they physically take you to spots they're allowing you to see, and you stay in one hotel. It is the hotel for outsiders. It is owned by the government, and that's the only place you're allowed to go at night. You're not allowed out at night. And interestingly, if you're on one of the higher up floors, you can see why. Because at night, the power goes out in North Korea. No one can have power, because they don't have enough power to literally keep the power on in North Korea at night. So only this little tiny place in the capital, including the place where visitors stay, gets to have power at night. That's it. North Korea is a crazy place. The more you learn about it, the crazier it gets. And that is why it's considered the worst place in the world for Christians, because effectively, no one can help you. There's no way for someone to sneak in there. Their entire border is armored. There's no way for someone to get you out. Generally speaking, if someone goes there, you know, they talk up the embassy or they talk up the travel agency, they find their way in, they get in there, and they actually had secret motives. Like they wanted to sneak around and take pictures. They wanted to go get someone out of the country. They wanted to expose stuff. Typically, they're captured, tortured until they apologize on film, and then they might get let go. But they don't always. So sneaking in there is not high on most people's lists once they start learning about North Korea. Yeah.
What's that place? South America.
39 or 47?
39.
That's Mexico.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Now, it's interesting to look at this list broken down on a spreadsheet. But what I first want you guys to know is that right now, 1 out of 9 Christians are suffering ongoing persecution. So that's not covering people who might get persecuted once or twice in their life. That doesn't cover them. This isn't covering people who, you know, get made fun of at school. This is covering certain kinds of persecution. This is losing your home, losing your family members, losing your livelihood, losing your life.
I lose mine. I love
With like in a fire. This is like someone knows you're a Christian, therefore they take your home. So 1 out of 9 Christians are going through that kind of persecution. It's so bad, guys, that in this last reporting year, we found that every 2 hours and 11 minutes, a Christian dies for being a Christian. Not like they got old, not like they had cancer. This is literally every 2 hours and 11 minutes just for being a Christian. The year before that, it was every 3 hours and 25 minutes. Think about how much that's gone up. That was roughly 9 a day 2 years ago and 11 a day now. That's pretty sobering to think about. There's 11 people dying because they're a Christian every day. Now remember, that stat's a year old, and the year before that it was down at 9. Now it's up to 11. Who knows what it is in real time? If it went up 2 people per day over the course of a year, it could reasonably be 13 this year. That's crazy. That's less than 2 hours. This is what it is to be a Christian on this planet. It's not well known in countries like ours because we don't go through this. So we don't really notice it. Missionaries tend to be the only ones who really get it. Because if you go to a foreign country and you are a Christian, you might not be persecuted like the Christians who live there. You're just seen as a tourist, you're just seen as a visitor, and in some of those countries, you just go on your merry way. Other countries, it's actually really scary. If you came from a country that's widely known to have Christians in it, you might be persecuted just for looking like you came from that country. There are countries where if you look like or talk like an American, they're going to presume you're a Christian and attack you. Because they know America has a lot of Christians in it.
I'm not from America. Except for America.
Avoiding persecution, though, isn't actually the answer. Because, and this is my favorite part, check out this graph. Oh man, it's really hard to see. I should have made that more obvious. On this graph, there's some lines that are green. If you fuzz your eyes out, maybe Emily turns up the lights, you guys can see it. Do you see the lines that are green?
Yeah.
So Yemen is green,
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia is green, Mali is green. I think that's the only ones on this slide. There you go. Now you can see it. Yeah.
I can't see now.
These are those same 50 countries that were the worst persecuted. Those green ones are the countries that were also on the top 20 for growth.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Think about that for a second. It's in the top 50 for persecution. It's also on the top 20 for growth. I'll slide you down to the bottom of this list, the other half of the 50. And look, there's more green ones. Even more green ones.
Wait, what do the green ones represent?
They're both on the top 50 worst countries to be a Christian in. The persecution is the heaviest and the hardest. And they're on the top 20 for fastest growing in terms of how fast new Christians are coming to the faith. They're in the top 50 for persecution and the top 20 for growth.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
That's insane. How many is that? Let's count them real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Go back. 9, 10, 11. So 11 out of 20 were on the top 50. 11 out of the 20 fastest growing were on the top 50 for persecution. Isn't that wild? And this is the point. The answer to persecution is not to lie and hide. Because the truth is, when we're Christians and we live our lives hunky-dory and everything's fine and nothing wrong ever happens and, oh, well, I guess I can't get that job, bummer. Oh, man, my car payment's hard to make. Gosh, gee, golly darn. Christianity doesn't do anything that everyone else notices. Christianity doesn't do anything that everybody else sees and witnesses and goes, wow, that was insane. But when you're living in a country where you can have your clothes stripped off and brought into the square and everyone will join in beating you.
That's really, really weird.
Everyone knows you're a Christian. And then there's the second thing that happens. Everyone notices your reaction. Do you get pulled into the town square and get beat and fight back? Or do you get pulled into the town square and get beat as you pray for the people that are beating you? Do you have your house burned down and scream at the people who lit the fire? Or do you have your house burned down and go kill people? Please, Dion, follow where I'm going with this because this is important. And go and share the gospel with the people who burned your house down. And they threaten to kill you if you don't stop, and you do it anyways. And then they kill you.
And you don't stop and you do it anyway.
Well,
Nathan, you can joke, but I'm not making this up.
Yeah.
These are real stories. So if people see that happening, the people who are following the religion of Islam watch that. They go, this is different. This is different. If someone was burning my house down, I would bow to the ground and do whatever they asked. If someone was threatening to kill my kids and my family and me, I'd shut up. Why is this guy still talking? Why is he trying to share the gospel at the expense of his life? that starts to affect people's hearts. That starts to make its way into the most hardened of killers, the people who are actually enacting the persecution. And that's why we see the growth in these countries. Because the persecution is great, the witness gets to be great. When you are persecuted, your response is one of the greatest witnesses you will ever have the opportunity of sharing with people. When people ridicule you, when they make fun of you for going to church, when they make fun of anything to do with God, your reaction tells them everything they need to know. If they make fun of God and you make fun of them in response, do you realize the seed you just planted? You just made them hate Christianity way more than they ever did. You've just pushed them so far away. When they make fun of Christianity, when they make fun of you for being a Christian, and you don't just take it, but you're kind to them in response, that changes what they think about Christianity on the spot, and you don't have to convince them of a single thing. You don't have to win an argument. You don't have to beat them at something. All you did was show them they were wrong. All right. Last thing to note about that graph. Out of those 50 countries, the 50 places where persecution is the heaviest, these are the 5 causes of the persecution. Where does it come from? Why is it happening? The least of them is ethnic antagonism. Sorry, not agnosticism. Ethnic antagonism. This is something like what we see in India. No, that's actually technically religious nationalism. Ethnic antagonism, that's actually something like what we see in Mexico. So in Mexico, Catholicism, a branch of Christianity, is the #1 religion. By the stats, like when they go door to door and ask people what religion do you follow, Christianity comes out over 90% in Mexico. Depending on the year, it's anywhere from like 93 to 97. So most people in Mexico are Christian. So how come it's on the map in the top 50 of worst persecution? Because of the drug cartels and the gangs. They look at Christians as people who will literally be made fun of, beat up, and robbed, and then they'll just be nice to you in return. And they're so hardened now, many of them brought up in Catholic homes, that they just don't care. It doesn't faze them anymore. They go rob a priest, they go rob a pastor of all the church's money, and they know the priest is only going to pray for them and be nice to them in return. So why would they go try and rob someone at gunpoint? Why would they try and go take money from a rival gang? Why would they go try and pick the pocket of someone who might turn around and hit them when they can just go take the money from a priest who won't hurt them? So much easier. Yeah.
So the thing you were just telling us stop persecution causes persecution?
In certain circumstances, there are people who aren't ready to respond. That doesn't change what the command is. The command from God is pretty straightforward. But that doesn't mean everybody's ready to hear it. Now, specifically, a Christian's job is not to reprimand and to punish someone who's being mean to them. That's the police's job. And some police are Christians, and so that overlaps. But the problem in Mexico is the gangs and the cartels outnumber the police. And so it hasn't stopped yet. It's just been going on. It's not going to stop anytime soon. But there isn't a better solution than bringing Jesus Christ into the life of those gang members. It's the best solution. Because rather than just put them in prison and make it so they can't do bad things, you introduce them to the one who gives them power to choose something better than bad things. Don't phrase it like that. It takes it out of context. All right, next up is communist and post-communist oppression. That's like what we see in China, or we see in North Korea especially, places where essentially the government has said, we are in charge and no one's opinion matters. And
Fair point.
that's essentially what you get, is Christians being policed into the ground. Even in China, where it is now legal, it's not legal to go to church. You can do it. It's legal. The church has to be a state-okayed church. And if you just try and have a home Bible study, you can get arrested for that.
What?
If you just bring Christians into your home and like read the Bible and talk about it, you can have your house knocked down.
How will they know?
They don't want it. You got to sign up with them. You got to register with them. You got to make sure you can prove on paper with documentation that you're following all the rules they have for a religious
Where?
organization in China.
What if, isn't like London or something?
England's not on the list, but they're in a totally different category of their own. The UK is one of those countries where Christianity is shrinking so fast, we can now predict the date at which there will no longer be Christians in it.
What?
The number of Christians in the UK is shrinking so fast that if the number stays straight, like the graph doesn't curve, the line goes to 0 in 2056.
That's depressing.
It's wild. That's like 37 years.
I'm gonna be alive.
Isn't that insane?
I might go.
37 years, and there might statistically be 0 Christians in the UK.
Then let's move to the UK, guys.
Religious nationalism, that's like what we see
Sweet.
in India. In India, I don't know if you guys know the history of India, Pakistan. You guys know that one?
Gandhi.
India, Pakistan used to be one big country, and they split up over religious differences. It wasn't a clean split. It's caused so much strife since. British colonialism had a big hand in it, but essentially, Pakistan was sectioned off, and everyone said, okay, Muslims, you can go live there, and India was sectioned off, and they said, okay, Hindus, you can go live there. And it's not that clean, it's not that tidy, it didn't go quick, but that's the summary of it. And so as a consequence, people in Pakistan now have this really strong idea that Pakistan means Muslim. If I'm a Pakistani, I'm a Muslim. If you're a Pakistani, you should be one. And likewise in India, the idea is that if you live in India, you should be a Hindu. And if you're not, then you're not really meant to live in India. Get out. And so this takes place in several countries where the religion and the living there is so closely tied in people's minds that they just persecute Christians because they want them to leave. Go away. I was born here. Go away. I've been here for 19 generations. I don't care. Go away. And they'll do whatever it takes to get them to go away. And the persecution in India in particular is worst if you converted to Christianity and you used to be a Hindu. If you're just a Christian and you move to India, they won't hit you quite as hard as if you converted and you used to be a Hindu. They have whole parades and holidays set aside to try and forcibly unconvert Hindus who've become Christians.
Wow.
Violent parades where they will make you come along. It's a crazy thing. So that's religious nationalism. Then you get to dictatorial paranoia. That's like Eritrea, where the government isn't against one religion, they're just paranoid. They don't like anybody, and they'll just squash everybody because they're scared of losing their power.
Isn't that kind of what North Korea is, though, in some ways?
Very much. It's exactly what North Korea is. But they're also communistic, so
Yeah.
you can kind of look at it either way. But no joke, if you're just looking at the top 50, Islamic oppression comes out at exactly 2/3. Exactly 2/3. It's crazy. Islamic oppression is one of the #1 things that's hitting Christians in our world today. But this is not bad news, oddly enough. Because inside of Islam, they believe in one God. Inside of Islam, they believe in the Bible. Inside of Islam, they believe in what sin is and what God thinks about sin. There's a lot of other stuff they believe that really gets their head twisted up in a knot. There's a lot of other stuff that's total malarkey. There's a lot of other stuff that goes on to contradict the Bible. But because they share all those similarities, there's a huge trend in Muslim countries, and that is that Muslims are converting to Christianity. It's one of the reasons why Muslim oppression of Christians is so great, is because they're afraid of all the Muslims converting to Christianity. Can you imagine what that would be like if the two biggest world religions slowly started trickling everyone from one into the other?
That'd be
It'd be
good.
amazing.
That'd be good.
Well, it
Them
depends what's
trickling
going
into
into.
And that's been the #1 trend. In those Muslim countries, the #1 change of religion is from
Yeah,
Islam
all we have to do
to Christianity.
all we have to do is make Christianity like trendy, and everyone can be like,
That's not usually how it works for them. because their life is on the line. Trendy doesn't usually cut. One of the coolest stories I heard is that inside of Muslim countries, it's not uncommon right now for missionaries to have Muslims knocking on their door saying, I had a vision of Jesus Christ, and he told me I needed to talk to you because I had some stuff wrong that I learned in the Quran. No joke, and it's happening by the thousands. There are people trapped in Islam that were brought up in it and they don't know any better. And I hate to say that phrase because it sounds wrong just to say it. But the fact is they haven't had a chance to hear anything but Islam. And then Jesus comes to him in a dream and literally just says, think about it. Think about it. It's pretty amazing that he would do that in this season. But that's what we're seeing. We're seeing people who already know that there's one God, who already know that the Bible is true, who already know that Jesus exists. They don't doubt that he exists. They just have been told a lie about who he is. So when he comes to them, he says, check it out for yourself. Go check the facts. They wake up, they listen, they convert. Because Christianity is a peaceful religion. There's nowhere in the Bible where you can find Jesus saying you should go to war or something. It's not there. But that's a large chunk of the Quran, is what are the grounds to go to war. And when Muslims who don't want to go to war, Muslims who don't like the idea of fighting, find out what Jesus actually said, they convert readily. All right, last thing I want to show you guys is this right here. You guys ever read your history books about World War II and find out about the gold stars they would stick on the Jews?
Yeah.
There was a season in World War II where the Nazis were trying so hard to get rid of Jews, to round them up and know exactly where they were and who they were at all times, that they made it illegal for a Jew to go out without their little gold star. It was the Star of David, it's a 6-point star. It says, look, I'm a Jew. And right now, in a lot of these Muslim countries, there is this symbol being put onto Christians homes, onto buildings that were secretly being used as a church. And this symbol is the character they use for an N. Because in the Quran, Jesus is not referred to as Jesus. That's actually an English word. They don't use that word if they don't speak English. But he is specifically Jesus of Nazareth. He's the Nazarene. Some will call him just for short. And so a lot of Muslims that start following Jesus are not being called Christians, because that's not a word in their language. They're being called Nazareans for following Jesus instead of Muhammad. And so now they're being branded with their letter N. And so this is the only symbol I could come up with to encapsulate all the persecution that's going on in our world right now. We've been doing this for 6 weeks, sticking symbols onto our timeline. It's okay. It happens to me too sometimes. I want you guys to read this verse to me real fast. This is it. Last thing. We are pressed on every side by troubles, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but not driven to despair. We are hunted down, but never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but we are not destroyed. Through suffering, our bodies continue to share in the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be seen in our bodies. Yes, we live under constant danger of death because we serve Jesus, so the life of Jesus will be evident in our dying bodies. So we live in the face of death, but this has resulted in eternal life for you. This is written by Paul to believers, explaining why he was not being scared away from Christianity when people continuously tried to beat him up and kill him. And ultimately, Paul did lose his life for being a Christian. He preached to one too many kings. He preached to Emperor Nero. That was the end for him. That was the end for Paul. But his legacy lived on. Because as Nero tried harder and harder to quell Christianity, to end Christianity, Christianity grew and grew and grew until a few hundred years later it was the national religion of Rome. And so that's it. We put our final symbol on the timeline, and we've summed up all of human history.
Count them in 3 seconds. And
Nah, I'm not going to do it.
Also, there's
Oh, sadness.
somebody vandalized.
I knew I lost.
What's right before first Samuel? Is that Judges?
Yeah, it's right before.
Oh, that might be one of the really gross parts I was talking about. They might have, pulled it out. I told you, the end of Judges is nasty. Someone might have agreed with me. All right, guys.
No, it's been rude.
Extra credit if
No,
you can
it's
come
been
back
rude.
next week and recite all these to me.
Oh my
Okay.
I won't just give you extra credit though. I'll bring my little stash of Dutch Bros gift cards.
How much is
I
that?
don't even like those things. Wait, what?
Name your gift card.
Wait, what?
Are you gonna do it though?
Wait, what?
What are we supposed to do?
If you can recite to me what all these are next week,
I probably
you
won't.
have to let it sit in your head for a week. You have to prove you still have it after 7 days of not seeing it.
On a piece of paper and memorize it from the paper.
If you can do it, I'll give you a gift card. Where would you want yours to? Or are you even gonna do it? Are you gonna try? That's all I care about.
I'm gonna try.
You're gonna try? Are you cool with Dutch Bros? Because I already got those.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, guys. I love you. I want you to be praying for. Shh. I want you to be praying for not the persecuted this week. They're doing well. They understand what's important. I want you guys this week to be praying for the persecutors. I want you to be praying for the North Korean government. I want you to be praying for Muslims. In particular, I want you to be praying for anybody you can think of that you know is persecuting Christians right now, that they would find Jesus. Because that is the only thing that will help them. Not being beaten by military strength, not being conquered by some other country. All right, guys, let's pray before you get out of here. I know we're late. I apologize.
Let's be leaving in like
6,000 shears is hard to compress. All right, guys, let's close our eyes and pray right where we're standing. Lord,
gosh dang it, I can't do it.
we thank you for the strength that you give us. Help us to count our blessings in these last days and continue to stand up for you no matter what the cost. Help us, Lord, to pray as often as we think of it for the persecutors in this world. The ones who are so angry at you, so staunchly against you, that they're willing to hurt a Christian for it. Help us, Lord, be the prayer warriors. And as opportunity provides, help us be the people that actually share the gospel with them and share your love with them. Lord, we ask that you would remind us when we want a weapon in our hand, that the only one you gave us is love. The ability to share your word with people. The ability to show them kindness. Help us to remember that when we are so close to flying off the handle and being crude or rude or just letting our anger show. Provide us strength through your Holy Spirit in that moment to be the Christian who changes someone's mind, not with a clever debate point, not with a clever argument, Lord, but just with our own behavior. We ask for all these things in your Son's name. Amen. I love you guys. Tell your parents I'm sorry we were late. We only had 6,000 years.
Oh my
I'll
god.
see you next week.
I'm gonna teach us that
Write them
backpack.
down.
Sit on the chair, please put it away.
You
I don't
can.
like putting
I'm
away
not gonna
4
do it.
chairs every night.
Put them up for 2 shares.
Put away my chair.
That one you're gonna like.
I almost will leave this right here just for you.
Ah.
Can you do the photo? Ooh, I want one of those. I want a gift card.
Is she actually sign up for
Yeah, you
for the, what is it? It's like the junior high
Summer camp?
summer camp. Yeah, or is he too late to sign up
You just
for
say
the
quick on.
help?
Oh, financial aid.
Yeah.
Aha. Well, technically, he's past the date I put on it for that, but I actually have just been getting the last people who told me they were going to do it and turn in the paperwork, so I haven't processed it. If he did it like before,
Yeah.
I think I could still
Dude.
shoot him. Drop it off. Yeah. I got him right in the kitchen. You can have one. It's basically just fill out the first sheet and then attach a letter written by JR. That's it. The other pages are all for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whose phone do I have?
Mine.
Gotta be fast though.
Will needs
Wait,
so
Daniel?